Please be seated. What a stark difference between the exuberance and the celebration and the welcoming of Jesus into Jerusalem. We celebrated outside with palms and circumstance and excitement of this new king for a new world, for a new way. And a couple of minutes later, not far away, a few little steps, and here we are now, sharing and hearing the story of a very violent, brutal death of this same man. So what happened? What happened between that moment of celebration and excitement to now? What caused this terrible, violent death? I've been rereading this book called The Last Week of Jesus. And it is a book that takes the Gospel of Mark, and each chapter is the day of Jesus' last week, starting with today. And so it has Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and then Easter Sunday. And so they break it up. So it's Marcus Borg and a co-author of his, and they take each day and they look at the gospel and talk about it. And one of the things that I had not known until I read this book the first time is the custom of the governor of Rome, or the governor that managed or was in charge of a particular area of Judea, to come in to Jerusalem on Passover. You see, Passover was celebrated every year, and it's the feast where Jews celebrate their liberation. It is the feast that Jews celebrate when Moses came to Egypt and set them free of the Egyptian empire. And so that's the thing they do, and they reenact that, and they tell that story, and they long for when they will be free again. And so on Passover, sometimes people got this crazy notion that maybe they should be free then too. And so there would be some rustlings, right? And so Rome, to be very clear of who was in charge, would send in extra Garians, extra soldiers, extra armed bodies of people with cavalry to keep things in order, because thousands of people would merge into this city. And so what we just did was this procession of Jesus into Jerusalem. And so Jerusalem was coming in from the east. And he's coming in on a colt. One that hasn't been ridden, so it's probably a little thing, right? So it's not a very dangerous animal, right? It's just this little donkey, and so Jesus gets on there. A gathering of people are putting their cloaks and palms and celebrating and saying, "Hosanna, Hosanna in the highest. This new king is come. The liberator is coming to Jerusalem. The Prince of Peace, Prince of this new way that we have been learning and seeing Jesus as he's encountered people and healed and saved and fed." But on the other side of coming in, on the west side, was the other procession, the procession of Rome. So imagine Pilate on a chariot with big horses, battle horses, covered with leather. And these garrisons, the soldiers with their shields and their spears in mass. with drums and leather and steel coming in to Jerusalem. 2 processions, one from the east, one from the west. The one from the east, Prince of Peace, charity, mercy, compassion. The one from the west, Rome, empire, domination. Who's in charge? In the theology of the Romans, Caesar was not only the head of state, Caesar was God. And so these 2 ways of living, these 2 ways of being, came together and came to a head. Jesus from the east, from Nazarene, a peasant community. Pilate from the west, empire, wealth, power, dominion. And it is this clash of these 2 ways of being that cost Jesus his life. This is what Jesus came in and was willing to give up his life for, to show the people of Israel that there was a different way, that Caesar was not Lord and God, that their God was their God of Moses, of Abraham, the God that kept God's promise for a new life, for a life of freedom and peace. And so that is that clash and that confrontation that Jesus made was a reaction, was reacted by Rome to then say, this has to end. And so Jesus comes in from the east and goes into the temple, and what does he see? What does Jesus see in the temple? Because it says Jesus walked in and looked at everything, and then he left. What did Jesus see? What was Jesus reminded of? And see, you see that in that time, the people on the margins, the people in the countryside, had been losing their land, their agricultural land. And more of the people who lived in the city of Jerusalem, they were taking that land and making that land their own, and they were making a lot of profit of that land. And so even though peasant life was not a really pleasant life, they could live off of it because they could live off their land and they would grow their food. But as more and more people were pushed out of their land because of debt or this, that, or the other, they would no longer were not able to survive. What else was Jesus seeing before him? He was seeing that people were having a harder time living in these conditions. It's getting harder and harder. So I ask, what would Jesus see today if he came today? What would Jesus see? I don't know if you've been following SB4 and the yes and no, we're in, we're out, we're in, we're out. SB4 is Senate Bill 4 that was passed last legislative session that said that law enforcement of Texas can arrest people they think have come into Texas illegally. How can they know if somebody came to this state illegally? Look at me. Look at me. Did I come here legally? Do you know that? What does Jesus see? What happens if he were to walk into the hospital? What would he see in the hospital, in the clinics, on the streets of Austin, Texas? What is happening in our communities that he would see, and what would he think about it? The growing debt when young people want to go to college, get an education. The lack of capacity of owning your own home because interest rates or mortgages are out of people's hands, right? What would Jesus see? So the question I would leave you with this Holy Week is, we just heard about these two processions. One from the east, Jesus, mercy, compassion, generosity. From the west, Rome, empire, domination. Which procession are we in? The beautiful thing is that there is redemption, and there is capacity for us to change our ways. And so which procession do we want to be in? Amen.